So I can see a couple of bits and pieces in the chat. Hello to everybody joining us. Nice to see you all. So just to remind everybody that's joining us now, this session is being recorded and we hope to make it available on the EURO website later on. I think we'll make a start. Are we good to go, Nuncia? Excellent. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Paula Carroll. I am the chair of the EURO Wisdom Forum. I just want to remind you a little bit about our etiquette for our OR in healthcare and logistics today with our Young Women 4OR. We're recording this session, so please keep yourselves muted unless we invite you to unmute. You can also turn off your camera. It'll help us on the bandwidth, and we'll just leave our speakers with their cameras on. A couple of things to bring to your attention if my slides will wake up. There you go. Wisdom, this is what we're all about. So we're a group of people who are associated with EURO. We created a forum and our objective is to provide a platform to support and empower and encourage the participation of all genders in OR. So we want men and women working together. We've been working on these objectives. So we have a white paper people are welcome to read. EURO have adopted an EDI, Inequality, Diversity and Inclusion policy, and that's on the website. As part of our activities, we promote and champion young women at the early stages of their career, and that's one of our activities today. And we're also doing some research, more about that as we go. Very briefly, upcoming events, some dates for your diary. Young Women4OR, the next call for next year, applications are open. You'll find details on the website, and that closes on the 15th of October. Our next webinar for the current Young Women4OR is November the 22nd. We'll be putting all the details on our page on the EURO website. And lastly, just to flag to you that coming up at Christmas time, we'll have our final webinar for the year and possibly a workshop. Our research, we're doing various different activities. One thing we're working on is a survey about the career paths for men and women in OR. That will close on the 30th of September. We have about 320 responses so far, but we would really like more. So Nuncia is going to pop that link into the chat. It only takes about 10 minutes, so please complete it if you haven't already done so. And also remind your colleagues and your network to complete the survey. So just some information down below about how you can keep in touch with us on the EURO website. We have a page, we have an email address, and we have a LinkedIn group. So I'm not going to talk for too long because we've got some very interesting talks today. These are our 2020 Young Women4OR. This is our second last talk. So today Lucy is speaking, and Beatriz and Melanie, and I'm looking forward to each of their talks. And that's the title of their talks, and I'm delighted to also welcome our subject matter expert today. So Stefan Nickel is joining us today from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. So I'm not going to say too much more about the speakers or their talk titles because they're going to talk to you. This is our schedule for today. So again, please keep your mics muted, keep your camera off, just our speakers with their cameras on. Each of the speakers will talk for about 10 minutes. Then Stefan is going to talk us through his ideas. We'll have a bit of discussion, maybe a bit of Q&A, and then we'll stop for coffee and networking. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to hand over to Beatriz, who is going to share her slides with us. Are you okay, Beatriz? Good to go? Excellent. I'll hand over to you.
Yes.
So,
thank you. So I think I'm sharing the slides.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So I will start now. Just first of all, I'm delighted to be here and to be able to very briefly present you this part of my work that was done together with Maria Antónia Carravilho and José Fernando Oliveira from the University of Porto, and also Alison Costa from the University of Melbourne. And this research is based on problems that car rental companies face. And car rental is a business that brings very interesting research challenges. It's quite different because of its flexibility, and the interactions that arise in that frontier between operations and fleet management, and also the pricing and revenue management side. And so today, the talk will be about the capacity and pricing problems in car rental. In this problem, capacity is something that companies decide before the season starts. So imagine we have a car rental company that has a network of locations or regions, and this network shares the same fleet. And before the season starts, the company has to decide how many vehicles, so the fleet size of each type. And here we consider a heterogeneous fleet, so we can have SUVs, family cars, economic cars available for the customers, and also how to make them available at each location in the beginning. So we're talking about fleet deployment. And then throughout the season, this capacity will be used to meet the demand. And by demand, we mean the number of customers that want a car for a specific rental type. We characterize rental type as by its start location and time, and by its end location and time, as well as the vehicle group. So if it's an economic car, a luxury car, etc. So this demand for the rental types is uncertain in this problem, and is also highly price sensitive. And something interesting is that it's also sensitive to the positioning of the company. So how it compares with competitors, not only the price itself, but also how it prices compares with competitors. And we will look at that in a minute. After the season starts, the company has several decisions that they can have recursively throughout the season to meet demand in a better way. So basically the fleet of cars is moved in time and space. So imagine we have, for example, 3 stations throughout time, and this fleet is moved by, for example, empty transfers. So the company can have a truck move a set of cars from A to B, or even a driver just putting one car from one place to the other where is needed the most. But also it can be moved by the customers. So the rentals, if they start and end in different locations, they can move the cars, and this deployment should also be considered. Also, a common practice is to offer upgrades. So we consider that if a customer arrives and he requires a certain car type, if the car is not available, then the company can offer a better car for the same price, and that is an upgrade. Also, some car rental companies have access to short-term leasing periods, so they can have more cars to meet some specific peaks in demand during the season. As I said, car rental companies are very much affected by competition, and especially because of some online price comparison tools. So if you go online and customers go and ask for a car going from A to B in a specific day for a certain time, and for each specific car type, they can see all the different brands that are offering the car and the price. And usually here there's a very high visibility of the lowest price. So there is a very big lowest price effect. This might not be true for all brands. Some brands have a higher recognition and they can benefit from this effect. But for most brands, the lowest price usually takes almost of all the wins. And we model that in our problem following these assumptions on the consumer behavior and also on the competition. And what we assumed was for each specific rental type, so imagine going from Lisbon Airport to Faro Airport on the 15th of August, a specific economic car, for example. We don't know the competitor price, the minimum price is an uncertainty, but we know that if we are below that price, then we will get most of the market. However, if we are, even if it's just €1 above the minimum competitor price, we will only have access to a residual slice of the market. And this is our main assumption. We don't know the competitor prices. We don't know what is this major slice of the market or what is the residual part of the market. But this is the behavior that we expect. As I said, we are doing this for each specific rental type, and a car rental company can be dealing with thousands of different rental types. And for each of them, we have these uncertain parameters, and this comprise a scenario. Let me just add that for each of these parameters, we don't know any probability distributions associated with them. We only have access to some bounds, lower and upper bounds on the values. This leads to two-stage formulation of this problem. So we are talking about decisions that we have to make before uncertainty is realized and decisions that are made after. Before we have, as I said, capacity and pricing decisions, some base pricing decisions. Then, as uncertainty is disclosed, companies can recourse to some decisions such as upgrades with the goal of then maximizing the profit. To tackle this two-stage stochastic problem, we propose a methodology that I will just very briefly give you an overview just to spike your interest, because as I said, our main challenge was that we don't have access to probability distributions. We have very little information on the uncertainty parameters. And so we developed a methodology that at the same time generates good solutions, and we'll see how we measure these good solutions, and also representative sets of scenarios. And this methodology is a math heuristic and is based on a genetic algorithm. And very briefly and very generically, genetic algorithms consist of a population of individuals, which represent usually solutions. And these solutions are classified, so to say, by their fitness. So how good they are is measured by their fitness. And then we apply some evolutionary procedures and obtain a second generation based on the first one, which has a higher fitness, and so on and so forth, until we get a very good set of solutions in our population. The difference in our approach is that we have a two-space genetic algorithm. On one side, we have solutions, so they represent this population as individuals that represent the first stage decision, so capacity and pricing decisions. And then on the other side, we have a population of scenarios. And in this population, each individual represents a possible realization of all the different uncertain parameters in our problem. And these two populations will evolve in parallel and interconnect each other because the fitness will depend on each other. To calculate the fitness, we solve the second stage model for all pairs solution scenario. And then what we say is that our solution is as good as it replies to the scenarios in the scenario population. And each scenario is as good and as it contributes to diversity in terms of the impact it has on the solutions. So basically, in the end, we hope to get solutions that have a very good performance compared with the scenarios, and this good performance can be tailored to different risk profiles of the decision maker, if it's more pessimistic or optimistic. And then on the scenario side, we hope to get a population of scenarios that is very diverse in terms of the impact they have on solutions. Just to go a little bit in detail on this diversity, we are talking about diversity on impact, not exactly on the parameters themselves. So imagine that we have just one scenario. If we have different possible solutions, the scenario will lead to different profit, different fitness. And if we map the worst possible profit and the best possible profit in a two-axis system, each scenario will represent a dot, a single point on that system. What we see that we get when we use, for example, random scenarios is a cloud of scenarios that can be very different in terms of the parameters, but not different in terms of the impact they have on solutions. What we aim to obtain is a more diverse population of scenarios that really make the solutions behave differently, and so they can be more representative of the possible outcomes that exist. In the end, the goal for our methodology is to give the decision maker visibility. So the decision maker can see with this solution across very different types of scenarios, what is the result. This is the conceptual visualization of that. So if I have different risk profiles, what is the impact in the end according to the most representative set of scenarios that we can get. So as I said, this is a very, very brief overview of the problem, but if you are interested, we have published a paper in EURO with this model and with this approach, and I would very happy if you have some comments or questions, or if you want to see this with more detail. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Beatriz. That was really comprehensive and well done on getting such a compact 10-minute summary of your work, and congratulations on your EURO publication as well. We're going to continue with the rest of the talks, and then we'll take all the discussion after the talk. So we're going to go straight to Lucy, if Lucy is ready to share her slides.
That's great, thank you.
Off you go, Lucy.
Right, okay. Hopefully it won't freeze. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak today. Today I'm going to be talking about some work I've done with a selection of different academics from all over the UK on modelling of waiting lists for chronic heart failure. So this project came out of an actual 3-day learning study group or online study group event through the Alan Turing Institute, and it was lots of people were involved in it, and we've taken it further since then. Okay, I'll just carry on. Okay, so just to shout out a few of the people on here. So myself, Christine Curry from Southampton, and Alan Chabnis from University of Bristol have been supervising students Alan Wise and Alex Heeb to put this together. And we've had support from clinicians from the University of Leeds, Ramesh Nadaraja and Chris Gale, and also Mamas from Keele University has been helping us as well from the healthcare side. So just to give you an overview of what we've been looking at, as has been happening in many countries, in the UK, we've seen a massive backlog of treatment waiting times and queuing times to get treatment, specifically for things like cancer treatments, chronic heart failure, etc. So kind of the motivation behind the study group was to actually look at, specifically for chronic heart failure, how we can actually add interventions to try and bring these waiting lists down, because the impact of COVID-19 has been huge on those waiting lists. So chronic heart failure, basically, in short, it's basically a condition that describes poor heart function. Unfortunately, once somebody is diagnosed with chronic heart failure, their median life expectancy is around 5 years. Diagnostic procedures that actually help us to diagnose this are blood tests and echocardiogram. The blood tests can indicate that somebody is suffering from chronic heart failure, but the blood test, a certain hormone in the blood can indicate it, but it cannot definitively say whether they've got chronic heart failure or not. So an echocardiogram is needed for that final diagnostic step. And in fact, that is the bottleneck where most of the people are waiting for diagnosis at the moment. So that was the main focus of our modelling the waiting list for echocardiogram. And just to put it into perspective, so the British Heart Foundation believe there's around 950,000 people living with chronic heart failure in the UK at the moment, and only around 650,000 of those have been diagnosed. Now, to make it even more interesting, or the problem more interesting, what we've seen in the last year was GP referrals for echocardiogram have been about 20% of their pre-pandemic levels. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't actually developing chronic heart failure anymore. It means people aren't coming forward, or they aren't going to their doctors in order to get referred for those echocardiograms. So really, that's quite a worrying statistic, because what we're expecting to see now is a wave of people that are more acutely unwell coming through this health system. And actually, if you don't treat chronic heart failure, it can actually lead to other conditions that are actually worse and lead to people being rushed in via A&E to hospital, which puts even more stress on the health system. So it's important to diagnose chronic heart failure as soon as possible, so that it can be treated and people don't need to go through these more stressful routes on the health system. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, whether there'll be a wave of patients post-pandemic that are more unwell than usual. So questions of interest in this project in general were, how long will it take for service to return to pre-pandemic levels, given that there's been this backlog? Well, that's quite a hard question to answer, because we don't generally know how many people have been developing chronic heart failure that haven't actually been diagnosed. We've got to infer that as well. Also wanted to know what new interventions could actually be used to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of chronic heart failure service, specifically getting people diagnosed, because as soon as they have been diagnosed, they are put on treatment. to alleviate their symptoms and help with their prognosis. And we want to know what impact these interventions will have on the backlog. Will they make it shorter? Fingers crossed, yes. Okay, so the approach that we took to actually modelling this problem was to use simulation. Really, the system has two different effects going on within it. So you've got people travelling around a healthcare system, coming in via either going to visit their GP or visiting hospital, but you also have this secondary effect of people getting more acutely unwell as we go through the process. So you could actually think of this system as being a hybrid model where people move through a discrete event simulation model, which represents the hospital and their pathway to diagnosis, but also have some kind of system dynamics model that models how they become more unwell as we get through as they pass through the stages of chronic heart failure. The problem that we had was that we didn't have data to actually represent how people pass through the stages of chronic heart failure, other than what we knew from the expert knowledge of the clinicians we were working with. So we decided to just work with a discrete event simulation model, and to start off with, although this project's still ongoing, and actually model just the health system with some assumptions on how people became unwell. So basically, the system that you can see here, this conceptual model, just shows that people can visit the GP. They have a blood test that then makes them, depending on the outcome of the amount of hormone that they have in their blood, tells us how quickly they need to be referred to hospital, if at all. And then they push through to their echocardiogram, or echo as it's shown on this chart. Or they might be rushed into hospital and have an echo as an inpatient, and in which case they can actually as an inpatient they get an echocardiogram very quickly. Yes, and whilst they're waiting for their echocardiogram, they can also get worse whilst they're in that queue, and actually either leave the system by visiting the hospital because they've got so acute that they need to go into hospital, or by dying. And then our model after the echocardiogram just showed people continuing on to treatment, because the assumption was that they didn't get any worse. The system isn't any worse. The queues are all at the echo stage at that point, so they would continue on to treatment, but there isn't really any problems with the waiting lists at that stage. Okay. So just to show you some of the preliminary results we had out of our simulation model that we built for this system, which was built in SimPy and is available on GitHub if you go to the link that was on the previous slide. You can see that the queues for inpatients, so that's those people that were rushed into hospital and actually are really acutely unwell, they went up during the pandemic, which is represented by, so restrictions in the UK are represented by these different lines. So here's where the restrictions started and stopped in 2020. And you can see they go up, but they do travel back down after the restrictions ease, whereas the queue lengths for people going in for echocardiograms as outpatients don't seem to tail off, which is worrying. And you can see a similar picture when you look at waiting times. So the waiting times for those that are in inpatients peak, but then drop after the restrictions ease, whereas they don't seem to be dropping off too quickly for outpatients. So we also looked at, once we've got our base level of model, our base model sorted so that it matched kind of what we were seeing in the real world, we went to looking at interventions that could actually be implemented within this model. And one of those was weekend working. And you can see that things are dropping back down much more quickly for outpatients and seem to be settling to pre-pandemic levels. The problem was that when we actually spoke to the clinicians about this, they said weekend working isn't something that they would necessarily consider because of how much people have had to overwork already within the pandemic, and it wouldn't really make their staff that happy. So at the moment, we're thinking of other interventions to look at modelling and experimenting with the actual clinicians' input. Okay, So I think I'm out of time, so I won't actually add any more, but we have actually submitted a conference paper on this work that's going to be presented at the 2021 Winter Simulation Conference. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you again for keeping on time. When is the Winter Sim conference this year?
It's in December, and it's hybrid, so yeah, you could join online or in person.
It's not that far away. Thank you, Lucy. Again, we're not going to have questions for Lucy for now, but if people have thoughts, you can start putting them into the chat if you like. And we're going to go to Melanie. So Melanie, are you ready to go?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. I'll hand over to you.
Second. Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. I wanted to use the chance to, present a bit of my work, but also to advertise some research problems, research topics that we came along when looking at emergency medical services. Looking back to my PhD, I think one of the things that helped me personally the most was actually getting a proper view on what actually is part of emergency medical services logistics, what are all the different planning problems, how do they relate, and making clear that we need data for these problems, and because we don't know when emergencies happen, we need forecasting, and this on different levels depending on what the research problems are looking at. We made a review paper out of this, and since then also more very nice review papers came out. One from Roberto Ainieri, for example, and I think they give very good ideas about what's already have been done, which is feels like hundreds of papers, but there's still really a lot to do. I mean, things get even more complex, I think, now with the pandemic, and some research problems I think that they're especially interesting and that they're currently investigated. One is fairness in emergency medical services, which is, I think, very interesting from a mathematical as well as a practical point of view, because what does fairness actually mean? Is it the same access to EMS services? So does it mean that for everyone the ambulance should arrive kind of in the same time, which is basically not doable? And how can this be modeled in a mathematical way? There are a few first concepts, but I think still a lot to do. Then something that we recently started, wondering how COVID actually impacted the EMS service, but what does it also mean for the future? So as I said, we need data input for planning, for example, for ambulance location problems. So we base on what's happened in the past, but if this behavior changed significantly due to COVID, we have no idea how this behavior will develop in the future. How do we plan for it then? And a third topic, which seems to be addressed in literature, is the applicability of models in different types of regions. But to me, it's still a very big issue. So if, for example, a coordination center comes to you and asks you to reorganize their ambulance location models, the ambulance locations, which model are you using? The one that you've always been using, the one that you just come to know? What is actually the best one for the specific region? I think this is something that still needs a lot more investigation. And when we look at EMS logistics, we usually make the world quite simple. We have an emergency coming up, and then we send an ambulance there, or maybe even a helicopter, and brings the patient to the hospital, and this is what we're looking at. But the world is actually a lot more complex, and this is just still a simple picture of the network. Patients could go to the GP first when they don't really imagine having a huge issue, and then the EMS comes, or people are sent directly to the ED in the hospital. They could also see after hours care, if it's in the weekends or the evenings. We might have something before the actual ambulance arrives, what we call pre-EMS service. So first responders, or we could also send a drone to the site to bring in an AED there, or maybe some medicine to support the EMS service. And depending on where we bring the patient might need another transport to a different hospital afterwards, which would then again be done by the EMS service, either in a transport or maybe even in a helicopter if it's a critically injured patient. So there's a lot going on, and all these things are intertwined, and it's difficult to only plan for one of these issues when they're all all relevant to each other. So the one thing that we looked a bit closer at is the communication between ambulances and hospitals. So because for every call in Germany that we have, for every ambulance that goes to a scene, they have to check if they bring the patient to the hospital, which they do in, I would say, 95% of the cases in Germany, maybe even more depending on the region. And for each patient, it has to be checked which hospital is the most suitable or the best one to bring the patient to. EMS service has to check the status of the hospitals, if they can actually take the patient, if they have free capacity. This takes a lot of time, a lot of communication. It's like millions of times this happens in a year, which is really a large effort and a bit unnecessary in our viewpoint. So what we came up with is something we call the emergency navigator. So a tool that connects the EMS service and the hospitals and uses also some simulation and forecasting inside to make proper decisions or suggestions about hospitals that are most suitable for a patient to improve the patient care, but also improve ED usage time that's necessary to bring a patient to hospital. So really thinking about the system and not only about the individual players in a way. And another aspect that I think is really important and that also got a lot more attention during the last years are the services that we think about when we say pre-EMS service. So basically everything that helps the patient before the ambulance arrives. And lucky enough, I was able to publish a paper just very recently with a colleague, Nikki from Linköping, where we looked at the OR literature and relevant other outlets to like what they so far addressed around these pre-EMS services. And based on that, we also came up with a quite a long list for open research topics. I mean, this because it's a complex system and there are a lot of difficult decisions to make. We would have expected to see many simulation studies, but we only saw some medical simulation studies, but hardly any OR related simulation papers. So I think this is the first huge research topic to actually be able to investigate, for example, the impact of drones or the impact of installing AEDs at scenes. When we look at AEDs, it's not only where to locate them. I think this is a problem that has comparably been well studied, but mobile AEDs, for example, are a huge topic when they're not installed somewhere, but for example, taken by drones or in cars, taxis, and so forth. There's also, I think, a lot of opportunity to come up with more sophisticated OR models for the use of drones, especially when combining different services. And also overall, hardly any papers use stochastic, robust, or multi-criteria optimization, which is, I think also really necessary when we look at this complex system where we have a lot of uncertainties, a lot of different actors with different criteria, with different objectives that have to be taken into account. So just a long list of possibilities. And what we're specifically interested in at the moment is the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, so drones as well as VTOLs, where we either can transport people or can transport some good or make images of scenes. And here I think it's very interesting if we don't only think about just one thing. So the classical idea would be to bring AEDs by drones, but if we think about installing such a system, so we think about locations of drones and depending on what they transport, maybe even the routes of drones, it would be interesting to analyze not only the use for bringing AEDs, but to combine this, for example, with blood samples or blood products. So not to equip every ambulance with some blood products, but to bring them on the scene by demand. And this obviously can only be done in a very short time frame. So drones would be a good idea here. Or also if we, like we do in the German system, have emergency doctors who need to travel by car at the moment. These, for example, could also be transported by VTOLs if we have country with a lot of islands or a very crowded area with a lot of traffic jams, where it's sometimes even unsafe for the paramedics or doctors to go fast through the streets. And yeah, so there are also a lot of options. And what we're investigating at the moment is the area where I live in, or the federal state of Hesse, where we used the population density as a first start, and also listed the drone candidates. And another thing we came up with pretty quickly was that we can't just have the drones fly everywhere. We have the large international airport of Frankfurt in our federal state, and obviously we can't just have a drone fly above the airfield. So we had to make sure that we excluded that in our solutions. And yeah, so this was just a brief overview about the research topics that I think are interesting to look at.
Thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you as well for keeping to your time slots. That was a lot of content to try and pack into the 10 minutes. I'm going to invite Stefan. So there's Stefan and our speakers. If you all want to turn back on your cameras, and we'll see you hopefully on screen. So for the next couple of minutes, Stefan and our speakers are going to have a chat and a little bit of a discussion. But for our participants, if you have any thoughts, if you also want to pop them in the chat, and we can bring those to you. Okay, Stefan, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, so as you can see, I'm not a young and not a woman, and so, okay, so now is the boring part is coming. I was asked to give some comments, and I mean, these are three so much interesting talks that we could maybe discuss for hours on that. Yeah, so I thought, how could I sort that? And what I like is, of course, the binding component, first of all, is logistics, and I like very much that logistics and OR is growing together much more. Yeah, and the topics are different, but in the end, if you look at the two roots of logistics, these logos, the Greek word for computation, and the logi for providing things to people, this is a very common ground for all three talks. So I think, so if we go to logistics, we are quite good in applying OR methods, and this is along these lines I would like to ask or give some comments to the three of you, and probably I just do it chronological. So I first maybe comment a little bit on Beatriz. I mean, I would have a lot of questions, really technical ones, because I also read this EURO paper, and but this is maybe not interesting for the audience here. But before I ask the more general questions, you use these two types of these genetic algorithms for reflecting the stochastic behavior, right? So in principle, it's just a replacement because you cannot write it as a two-stage stochastic program completely, right? Or do you use it as a heuristic for such a two-stage stochastic program you could formulate?
Yes, we formulated the problem as a two-stage stochastic problem. And then the heuristic you use to solve it, and at the same time to generate the scenarios to solve it. So if we are able to get, we can use some other method to generate the scenarios, and then use the same way the genetic algorithm to solve the problem. But in that way, we wouldn't need the two spaces. It could be a traditional, so to speak, genetic algorithm to solve the stochastic problem, but we formulate it as a two-stage stochastic problem.
Okay, yeah. No, I saw that in the paper, and this is exactly, you answered already in the direction I was thinking, is that couldn't you replace for the second stage the stochastic program the model, like the one Lucy used? I mean, you see, I mean, I think what you have the two stages is you do the general decisions, right? I mean, and then what you try to do is to somehow figure out how the customers would behave, how the realization would be. So what would be a profit in the end, right? This is the second stage in using it. So wouldn't it be idea to use simulation there then?
It could be interesting because, as you said, it's true. We are focusing more on the strategic decisions, so to say, and we use the more operational one. So the second stage is more reflects almost it's an approximation of a multi-stage. It could be more operational setting. So in that way, yes, it could be an interesting idea to still, we could use the model for the more strategic outlook, which is our main focus, and then incorporate some simulation to be a different way to model the same in a way the more operational decisions. I think that could be an interesting way to go. Yes. Definitely.
Yeah, because I think what you had to do assumptions. Yeah, when do you get the profit, when not? And I think in a simulation, first of all, you can model easier dependent variables. So you don't need stochastic independence or assumptions like that. Yeah, to model you, and you can have more erratic behavior of the customers. Yeah, you can put the mood of the customer in, yeah? That the customer doesn't like the color of the car in the end and just doesn't take it or whatever. I mean, you know. Okay, sorry, but
thank you. Yeah,
this would be some direction. But what I was the more general thing is you concentrated very much on car rental, and I don't know, at least in Germany, we are discussing much more mobility in a general sense, yeah? And I was wondering if it wouldn't be worthwhile to look at this problem as mobility services. Because when I arrive at the airport or whatever, I want to go from A to B. Maybe I land in Lisbon and I wanted to be in Porto. Maybe not, but okay, sometimes, yeah, so you have to wherever, yeah, and then in the end you wouldn't care if you really rent a car or if there's a bus going, maybe with enough space, with luxury seats, yeah, no one would care, but most people just don't know the options. So
it's an interesting yeah, we actually, with my PhD was mainly focused on car rental, but I finished the PhD in the end of 2018, and from there we actually have been extending the focus from car rental to car sharing. And yes, the way to go, I totally believe, is mobility as a service and looking at it in a more integrated way. I completely agree. Yes. I think this is a good stepping stone for then understanding the customer's demand as more as what is the service they need and not so much the product.
Yeah, because if you could describe the service like, I need to be transported together with my luggage, and now give me all the options and the prices and maybe the characteristics, then I could choose. And then maybe people use more the train or the bus or shuttle bus instead of renting always a car. But if so I don't know, because what we do in Germany at the moment in Karlsruhe, there is some initiative which is called C2C bridge. So it means city to country bridge. So the problem is that in cities we have all these fancy mobility concepts, and on the countryside we have a car. Yeah, and probably it's the same for many countries. Yeah, if you are in a metropolitan area, you have all the fancy services. As soon as you are 20 kilometers outside, you have a car, or twice per day a bus or so. Yeah, and so the interesting thing would be if the idea of this car rental or this mobility service rental, then I think this would be a nice would be there. That then it's also easier to talk about capacities, because capacities would not be buying externally, but maybe relocating between different cities or places, and then having like some mobility hubs where you switch from the public transport maybe to some rental kind of thing, which could be very short rental. Or I mean, and my feeling is that if you model it right, the OR models still stay very similar, so you could apply all the concepts, but it would have much higher impact on modern mobility concepts. I don't know, just some. You see, I was told to tell things, yeah. So I'm just, maybe it's 80% is nonsense.
I agree. I think this is a really. I will check out the concept that you mentioned. I think it's really interesting. I also agree, and we see even a lot of car rental companies doing that journey from just renting the car to providing also some more short-term services to actually providing the car as a service and not just as a product. So yeah, thank you for the comment.
Thank you. So I have to look for because Paula will switch my microphone off if I take too long. So let's switch. Yeah, I see. You see, I'm already afraid, Paula. No, let's go to Lucy. Thanks for this nice model. And what I was wondering is, you mainly use simulation as a tool, right? There's no analytical modeling of these waiting time distributions, right? Or
no, there wasn't. So I think the real reason behind that was because of it starting in this 3-day study group and the people that came into the group having expertise in simulation modeling. So it wasn't necessarily you know, something where we thought too hard about what we were doing. We're trying to get a hard and fast answer. So I think that's where we started, and then that's kind of where we stuck. But I think, yeah, there are other options because it's basically a queue, right? So you could potentially do something like that.
I was just wondering, because there's this thing like queues with autocorrelation, so that and this effect I could see in your diagrams, and I was wondering a little bit if there's more behind it. As you showed, like in the hospitals, they are able to manage this backlog, and for the general practitioners not. And typically these autocorrelation effects is like, I mean, if there's more hectic, people have other things to do, the backlog gets larger. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the general practitioners now have other things to do than treating the waiting. I mean, it's not good that they have other things to do, yeah. But like in Germany also, they blocked all the general practitioners with vaccination things and others, yeah. Also like not even non-corona vaccinations. People were all waiting, and now they do vaccinations for influenza again in autumn time. But all the people which had a backlog, it's still that general practitioners are always overworked. So there is no time slot left for them to really do that. Or so I don't know. Yeah, did you think about what you could do to get rid of the backlog?
Yeah, so I think it's really difficult because of how big it now is, but there are a few things that we thought about. So initially in the UK, I don't know if it's the same around Europe, but they reduced the number of actual, what are they called? Appointments, there we go, appointments each day, because they needed to clean the rooms in between, because at first everyone thought that it was spread by touch. And now evidence seems to be pointing away from that. So we were wondering, one of the things we were thinking about was trying to increase that back to either normal capacity or even over that, so that the staff weren't working more hours, but potentially were putting more patients through, just so that they were getting diagnosed, because before diagnosis, people are put onto maybe some tablets once they see their GP that will actually stop the symptoms, but they do not affect the prognosis of the patient at all. So until they're actually diagnosed with chronic heart failure, they're not getting anything to actually effectively try and slow it down. So yeah, that's the idea. That's one idea we have. Yeah.
So I was just thinking about that, because just one of my PhD students finally defended her thesis, Alexander, and she was working on exact distribution of indirect waiting times, which is more or less what you also model, of course, under very, very specific circumstances. And I was wondering if there could be some synthesis on these 2 points of view. And the last thing before I switch to Melanie, before she gets mad at me, because it's only then 2 minutes, but we already discussed a lot of her work, so it's for me even harder to. One thing I was wondering is really to combine the scheduling for appointments with your model, because this is exactly what you addressed. I was wondering, we have to get rid of the backlog. So this backlog means it's existing work which has to be done. So we have to have a buffer in the appointment planning, right? And this would be interesting how this could be integrated. So like to couple simulation with a scheduling tool to say, okay, if we do a more intelligent scheduling, we can get rid of this backlog. And I think this would be something I mean, just from OR perspective, this would be very interesting, not to say, okay, we observe it, we can simulate it, and it's like that. But if you behave a little bit more intelligent with appointment planning, you don't have a problem that you strategically discriminate the people with the heart diseases, because they can't wait. this is the big problem. I mean, you shouldn't wait. You have to do something. And so
I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that it would be interesting to look at the effect that would have on how quickly these backlogs could get removed anyway. So I'll let you answer questions now, Melanie, if you, because we have the time.
I wanted to, sorry, I would have hours more of questions, but these were the most important. So with Melanie, of course, we already talked a lot on EMS systems, so it's I have to be careful that I don't ask you to things which we already discussed and whatever. But what I was wondering, maybe you can comment a little bit, because I think this is for everyone interesting, a little bit about this magic triangle, which I think is logistics, medicine, which you showed a little bit, and law regulations. So could you, because I know that you work with people in New Zealand, you work with people in different European countries. Can you comment a little bit on the influence of the EMS strategies there?
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, this is, yeah, you're totally right. I mean, this would have been also a very nice point for my open topics list, because if you look at different countries and how they work, you're sometimes wondering why these countries have different systems, and why, for example, we in Germany do need to have the emergency doctor if basically all other countries don't. Why in England, New Zealand, Australia, paramedics need to study what they're doing, but then are also allowed to do more than our EMTs are allowed to do. And like, why is this so different if a heart attack in Germany is usually the same than, for example, in Portugal or in the UK? And these regulations do have a huge influence on what we're allowed to do and how the system works. And it's not always that they seem to make a sense from a logistics or a medical point of view, which makes it then especially difficult to come up with proper solutions if you're always wondering about the why and not really the how in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, did you think about I mean, you did a lot of review work on these literature topics. Yeah. Is there some kernel, I mean, some core part of the algorithms which doesn't depend on law? I mean, is there something which is clearly which you should do, and other things which depend?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the ambulance location models, the core is usually the same somehow. I mean, because emergencies arrive and you have to assign the ambulances, but this is also only the case, I guess, because we in Germany, when we plan the ambulance locations, we just don't consider the emergency doctors, which we probably should, because it's actually not true to leave them out in the ambulance location model. It just makes it so difficult that we forget about them. And I think the basic main regulation every country somehow has is the form of response time that is somehow envisioned by the different countries. So the maximum amount of time that should pass before the ambulance arrives. I think basically every system has that. We just have a lot of different numbers, and even within Germany, we're not sure about the right time frame. But yeah, I think this is there, and like, I think this is the main similarity, I would say, but it already differs when it comes to the time frame when the patient should be in the hospital. For example, the Netherlands have a deadline there. Germany, we don't. In the US, they want to have the patient there as fast as possible. In Germany, we're fine with spending an hour on the scene treating the patient. So from there, it already gets difficult when we model stuff, especially when we want to build simulations.
Yeah. I also know that, like in Portugal, you are not free in your choice of a hospital, right? There's usually some allocation rule, but I think in emergency it's free, or is it? Or I don't know. I was just wondering, because we have people also from Portugal there. This was a question.
I'm not an expert, but I would say that it actually depends. And the free of the hospital, it depends. For most, I guess for most emergencies, you're not free. You go to the nearest hospital or the hospital of residence. If you're pregnant, you can choose the hospital. Okay. But I'm not sure if that's on the regulation or if it's just a common practice.
I think
but this is the question, maybe, or also what Melanie is dealing with is the nearest hospital. Is this a good objective? Yeah. What is exactly? I mean, usually your survival should be the objective, your survival probability, and this is so hard to model probably.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but it's also for us, it's also the waiting time in the ED, for example. So in Germany, we transport many patients that are not admitted to the hospital afterwards. So they're treated in the ED and then sent back home, or maybe just stay there for a day, like overnight patients, like for example, an elderly person who's dehydrated. So they might be admitted for a day, but they're not really becoming a typical hospital patient. And for them, being transported 10 minutes longer for waiting 2 hours less in the ED is really like a win-win in the end, right? And also the ambulance will need a lot longer for the turnover in a hospital if the ED is crowded. So for them, driving 10 minutes longer, if they can get rid of the patient 20 minutes sooner, is again a win-win. So there are a lot of things, and that's why I said briefly that we're using also machine learning and simulation stuff to predict these times, because when we make the decision, the patient is not at the hospital, he's still at the scene, so we don't know for sure what the times will be. So this is also how we can get a bit of OR and machine learning into practice in a way, and combine these aspects.
Okay, so I see Paula. So I think we have to stop our 3-hour planned conversation here and reduce it now.
We won't stop. We'll just kind of ask other people if they'd like to maybe turn on their cameras at this stage. So I've seen there was a couple of questions popping into the chat, and Lucy has Lucy has her lovely cat with her there as well. Lucy has answered in the chat a question from Isha about some of the topics that you're raising there, about kind of the allocation of where you do what and when. But if I can ask all the participants that are there, if you want to turn on your cameras, one of the things that struck me was that each of you talked about needing data before you could make your assumptions. And I know we have some people on in the participants there who might have some interesting insights or comments to share. I know some people have had to go for classes and other meetings, but just to throw open to the other participants there, anybody else want to kind of ask any questions? So again, I don't want to interrupt. There were some lovely themes, I thought, really, the data. So Beatrice mentioned for her scenarios, she had no probability, and I didn't quite catch how you made the scenarios.
Well, actually, what we did was, if we don't have the probability distributions, if we don't, we only know we have some uncertain parameters, so we know the bounds. What we will try to get is a population of scenarios in which they are as diverse as possible. And to achieve this diversity, we basically applied some niche techniques that have been used for instance generation, but we use it for scenarios. But the idea of diversity was that not that for example, you have a set of 20 scenarios. It's not that the values of the parameters themselves are very different. So we have one with 0 and one with 10. Is that actually the outcome that they have on the solutions, the impact they have on the solutions is diverse. So you could have a scenario that leads to very high profits or very low profits. And then, so they could be different in terms of the impact they have on the solution and not exactly on the parameters themselves. Not sure if I quite answered your question.
Yeah,
but
no, I think it's also interesting because I'm not involved in the health area at all, but I thought there was some interesting connected things that Melanie was talking about in terms of her scenarios and her legal, the regulations in the domains or the different geographical areas being so different. How can you possibly cope with generalizing all of that when they're so diverse? Melanie, do you want to try that? Or Lucy, does your simulation help on any of that?
I mean, for us, I guess, if building a simulation, then actually comparing different system perspectives, I think would be very, very good start. I mean, what we did to derive different geographical scenarios was actually looking at city planning literature and figuring out how to actually model different geographical structures and what research is doing in this area, and then from then trying to kind of build a data set for different models. I mean, that's also, I think, a little issue maybe in the ambulance location literature, is that everyone comes up with a new region they cannot solve with the current literature, which is, I think, is fair, but it's not really that there's like a data set to just compare models, and like something we had for routing, for example, right? Or for the traveling salesman, we have instances that we can compare algorithms for and models, but we don't have that for the ambulance location area. And yeah, so this is what we started with. And if we then also, if we have a nice set of data instances, maybe also from other countries, to see maybe also what a different influence of call behavior has, because I mean, this is also a big impact, right? So do people call an ambulance for certain emergencies, or do they go to a GP or to the ED themselves? Can they do that? This will influence the call behavior, and we have to take this into account when we then also compare the systems behind that. That would be very nice to be able to do this, and then potentially figuring out what could be kind of an ideal way to design an EMS service.
Yeah, and as you said, given that each region has its own regulations, that's very difficult to generalize that, and very difficult then to have kind of a useful shared set of data instances that would translate across. I picked out one word. You said intertwined when you were giving your presentation. So the intertwining of all of this with the, as Stefan said, back to the logistics and our traditional OR stuff. I'm just going to go to the chat there, and just some people have to leave for classes and so on. But if anybody has any questions or comments, you can pop them there into the chat. And if everybody's happy, any other? So Stefan, maybe back to you, or Lucy, did you want to add any last thoughts given the threads, the conversations we're following?
I don't know. I think we at least discussed a couple of things, and of course it's always very interesting to see the dependencies of local regulations, logistics principles, and OR. Because I think logistics is partially like norming things also, so which we cannot model in OR. But it should be also universal. So logistics works in whatever, in Ireland, in UK, in any other, in Thailand. Yeah, the principles should work. Then we have the OR, where we can model the quantitative part of it. So which is not normative, or not just to say we use the same cars everywhere, so we can interchange them. This is part of logistics. There's, by the way, in healthcare, even a group, at least for the German surgeons, they have something which we call operating theater logistics, which is just that on the different types of operating techniques you use the ones which are standardized, because then every doctor can work with every supporting group in the operating room. Is it and then called, I don't know, operating room nurse or whatever. Yeah, I don't know the names all, but and this is interesting. A lot of scheduling algorithms fail because of this standardization, which is the logistics. But then there's also the law regulations, which allow you or don't allow you to do certain things in competition, or where you have free prizes or not free prizes, or like in Germany, the strange system that you have to pick up an emergency doctor to go to a scene. While in many countries, they don't know that concept. Yeah, you just go there with the paramedics and bring the patient to the hospital. And it's very interesting that worldwide, there are nearly no studies about what is better. Because if one of the two is better, take the better one. And if nothing is better, take the cheaper one. Yeah, because so I mean, and there's no answer to that. Quite interesting. Yeah, so
definitely,
okay.
Definitely.
These were my last words. So
thank you, Stefan. They're very nice last words to end on. So I think between our three speakers, each of them had kind of talked about their own research, but they were exposing us to whole new research agendas. Really, each of you kind of were showing us lots of avenues that can be followed, and I think Stefan kind of pulled together the threads very nicely there about kind of some of the crucial aspects of them. We're going to pause for coffee, or not pause. What we're going to do is we're going to go into into two smaller groups because it's kind of a relatively large group here. So people are welcome to stay, and we're just going to have an informal chat and discussion. We again just want to remind you that we have other events coming up for the Wisdom group. So all the details are up on the website. And in particular, at our Christmas webinar, we haven't decided exactly. We were hoping to run some kind of an online workshop. So whether that online workshop is at focusing on career building and networking strategies, or perhaps writing academic papers together. So we've kind of two topics we're kind of divided on which one should we focus on if we do an online workshop at Christmas. So that might be a question you might discuss in the breakout groups. So Nuncia is going to put us into breakout groups. They'll last for about 15 minutes, Nuncia, and then they will bring us back to say goodbye. So before we do that, I just want to share my screen one last time, very briefly, if I can do this, because I just want to, before we leave, make sure I've got this right. There we go. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
And I just want to say the thank you. So in case you have to drop out during the coffee, so thank you very much to Stefan. Thank you very much to our speakers today, Beatriz, Lucy and Melanie, to Nuncia, who's doing all the support there, and to our PR subcommittee who helped us with all of the logistics. So Nuncia is going to put us into the breakout rooms for some coffee and chatting. And hopefully I will see some of you there. So thank you, everybody.
Okay.